Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon, co-author with Peter Vale of the digital book on Practice as a Way of Being. Find it at mylibrary.world. And now to our show. Have you ever completed a conversation with someone and found yourself shaking in a good way? And it's not because it's cold here in Connecticut. It's a kind of energy overload that comes with someone who is quick and smart and in tune with things that matter to you, in this case to me. And this is Kathy Lund Dean, who is a Board of Trustees endowed chair for Gustus University in Minnesota. I've known Kathy a long while, and I've seen her career develop from the early 90s through our association with the Management and Organization Behavior Teaching Society. We're both fellows now. We both received their most distinguished award, the David L. Bradford Outstanding Educator Award. But really what makes me shiver and shake in that conversation is what you'll hear us saying about the work, about the practice of teaching, both our own and that of the really tens of thousands of men and women who are striving at this very moment in the middle of the winter of 2024 to engage their students, to meet all of their university responsibilities, to publish, to design workshops for conferences. The work is tremendously satisfying and incredibly difficult, more so these days. So listen to Kathy and me have this conversation and ask yourself in your own field, how's the foundation? Where is the support that we need to do our jobs better every day from our institutions and from our communities and our investors? And if the support is waning, if the support really isn't going to be there in the future, recognize that's a hell of a challenge to keep on keeping on. I'm confident that people will find out how to do that anyway, and I'm confident that the administrators who are letting that support dwindle from the economic challenges that they face will fight their way into ways of making the work. So there's my speech. Now listen to a brilliant fellow professor of organization behavior, Kathy Lund Dean. Well, folks, Kathy Lund Dean and I met, I think, in around 1990 at a conference called the Organization Behavior Teaching Conference, now called Management and Organization Behavior Teaching Society Conference. By the time you get through saying it, it's over. No, but it is. But I was on the board at the time when we wanted to add in the M to try to extend the invitation to people who love teaching, but also taught subjects more related to the aspects of management that are not necessarily covered in organization behavior. No matter what, I have always looked forward to arriving at whatever campus we are scheduled and seeing Kathy, because as we were talking about just before I started recording, she remembered who I am, and I know who she is. Now, that sounds like a big deal for a podcast, but it is a very big deal. We would come together from all over, some from other parts of the world. And there would be a gathering at the beginning, maybe a little, like a barbecue or something. And you could look around and there were people who knew each other from other times, and they'd kind of cluster just like junior high, right? The popular kid table. And we had a culture, and hopefully it persists, that there is no popular kid table at our society, that we're all equally passionate about teaching. And while other credentials define us, as in the case of Kathy, who I could, spend 20 minutes just running through her a very impressive vita, or what we call curriculum vita in our world, because you write, you design, you lead, you do a lot of things. But what makes us both recipients of the David L. Bradford Outstanding Educator Award is what it says on my plaque, recognizing a lifetime, I got to get the plaque, a lifetime demonstrated achievements over a lifetime focusing on teaching and learning excellence. Now there's mine.
Yeah.
And Kathy got hers the next year and deserved every bit of it. A lifetime, Kathy.
It's a lifetime. It feels like a lifetime.
Yeah. And I would ask you, when did teaching hit you like a pizza pie,
Right
in the eye? Yeah. A Perry Como song. When did you find yourself being a teaching person, going right back to your roots?
Well, thank you and welcome, everybody. Thanks for listening. And I really appreciate this, Dave. It's really funny when we were talking beforehand, it seems when we talk together, and I think this is true of your experience, the old timers, the MOBTS old timers, it feels like no time has passed. Yes. And I think that's a really unique characteristic. And when I was looking for doctoral programs, one of the things that I really wanted to make sure was included was a focus on teaching. I had, in my former life, out of undergrad, I was a banker, and I had owned a small business. And in my corporate life, I did seminars for the community, especially saving and investing for women, banking, this is the 80s, and doing some corporate training. And I really liked helping people learn new things. And I was very comfortable not needing to know everything myself, and learning from the group. And so it was before we even had this language. It was very dialogical, but I didn't know that at the time, right? So selecting St. Louis University for my doctoral program was very intentional. I really liked both of my mentors, and I'll give a shout out to Jerry Katz and Scott Zafransky, who was the chair at the time. And Jerry was my methodology and dissertation mentor. And there was a certificate program about teaching your first year. You had to attend at least monthly, sometimes more frequent, seminars on the essentials of teaching well. How do you build a syllabus? How do you engage students? How do you put together a test or some sort of assessment that links your learning objectives to what you're actually measuring? And, right now, that seems like 101. Back in the mid 90s, not as many people were talking about that.
Right.
That's prior to AACSB's assurance of learning. That's prior to all of that institutionalized process that we now know. So I really enjoyed it. And my second year, we were just talking about another MOBTSer, Greg Kahns, who's at Fairfield University now. He convinced my chairman, Scott, to send me to my first, at the time, OBCC.
There you go.
Case Western Reserve University. And he said, you need to know these people. And I think I've only missed one with having a child. I think I've only missed one.
Yeah, shame on you to have a baby right in the middle of OBGC. My Lord. Couldn't you have waited another week?
Plan that a little bit differently. But, it is that community, and it is that community, and
Yeah.
it's been delightful.
Well, that the history of the attention to teaching, particularly at the university level, is remarkable to me because universities have been around. My school just kicked off our 175th year yesterday. I went, says 30 of those years are mine. And I was thinking all those years, what distinguished our school as a regional um, multi-purpose university was small classes and teachers who came there and intended to stay and grow in those jobs until, like me, they discover themselves in their 70s. So that was kind of the way. Now, what kind of shocked me a little bit is I looked about this big room full of people, and we emeritus had been encouraged to come. I didn't see many older teachers. And then I asked a friend who there, I said, where are some of the gang? And they had buyouts for the last couple of years. And so that's kind of the yin and the yang to wanting to stay and work for indefinitely on behalf of students. It kind of made me not a little sad, a lot sad, because what allowed us to have close to a lifetime of commitment to teaching, learning excellence was the fact that we had a pretty solid ground under our feet. Is that not your experience in your various schools that you've worked at?
It is, and we still have a lot of work to do, and I think the headwinds with higher education are not supportive of that same foundation that you and I have both enjoyed and continue to enjoy. When I was editor of JME, General Management Education, Jeannie Foray, my co-editor, and I would do what we called road shows, and they were developmental, faculty development, manuscript development, those kinds of things, as workshops all over the world. And we would certainly talk about manuscripts. What the conversations often morphed into were more generalized conversations about effective, experiential, and engaged pedagogy.
Yeah.
And how do we do this well? And so I think the mismatch between, and the irony, I think, in many ways, of what students are looking for and what they desperately need, which is engaged pedagogy, relational learning, process-based outcomes. They can look up anything they want online. AI is making any kind of content immediately available.
Yes.
What they need are these skills-based learning.
Yes.
And this relational process-based outcomes. How do you forge interpersonal skills?
Yeah.
How do you resolve conflict well? How do you think through an ethical dilemma? These are all process-based outcomes.
Yeah.
And at a time when students need more of that, we're moving toward fewer of us that are set up institutionally to be able to provide that fewer tenure track lines, many more contingent faculty, much higher teaching loads for those folks.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that foundation that you're talking about is being buttressed and pushed around by higher education as an industry and sort of the industry shocks that we've undergone. I mean, everybody wants to blame COVID. Everything was very much in play before COVID, and COVID just exacerbated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's so convenient to,
Right. Yeah.
COVID. Oh, yeah, I get it. So now we can all be separate and hate each other and fight over the political fence and all that. No, but there has been a trend. There has been a trend, and we used to have sessions around it in the early 2000s around just what you're saying, particularly as accreditation, which used to be somewhat reserved for the well-funded schools, research schools sometimes were, were the ones grabbing the business accreditation. They wanted to spread it out so the rest of us, which is fine. But if you look at the criterion for faculty, for example, if you're an extraordinarily devoted teacher and can do those things you just talked about, Kathy, in such an elegant way, then they look and they say, well, but where are your publications? And this is what you and Jeannie and others worked on. Well, where are your publications? So we provided through the society journals that recognize the scholarship of teaching. But that was fairly recent and maybe a tad late for some people who got washed out of these pre-accreditation removals of people who weren't going to look good on paper. Yet in the classroom, where's my favorite professor? Well, she's not here any longer. How come? She didn't have enough publications. I mean, I'm being a little melodramatic, but it basically happened at my school, the one I just visited after a while. I hadn't been there quite a long while. It's been 8 years since I retired. Anyway, yes, the foundation is rocking, and yes, it's more challenging, and yes, AI now is coming at us. But still, there's something about teaching that would, as it did for me, make us have to adapt. We make ourselves have to adapt because we do not want to be removed from that opportunity. Am I overstating that?
I think the opportunity to adapt is a very lovely way of saying, you better figure this out or you're going away. And what I think is really interesting about relationality with students, because I think that's really the heart of good teaching, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Relationship.
Meeting students where they are, being present to students, being present right then, and hearing them and listening to them. And I have written relatively extensively about what I think is this a constellation of growing and very interpersonally intense skill sets that we need to now have. I had a paper come out late last year about the post-lockdown reality of business schools, and we need to really fundamentally rethink how we're resourcing. And we could be really creative about resourcing if we stop thinking that there are these binary or sort of buckets that you were talking about, like there's a teaching bucket and then there's a research bucket and then there's a service bucket. All of those things need to be working in concert. But what can't go away is the fact of what our students are needing from us. And I think it's a tough line. There have been many, and I know I'm not alone, because I've gotten emails from people after the work that I've published has come out. We are being expected, marketed, I don't know what the verb is, to be in this sort of quasi-clinical role with our students. Like, faculty are the front lines. I've seen that sort of language. Faculty are the first responders for student needs, and it can be mental health. It can be relational problems they're having at school. It can be terrible things like sexual assault. It can be all of these learning and classroom adjacent requirements. They're all grounded in relationship. And the constellation of needs that students have, and we're, in loco parentis, right? So they come to us, and so we have to think through a pretty sophisticated list of responding to those needs. What are the resources that we have? I have argued vociferously and in writing, we are not clinicians, and it's actually unethical for us to
Yeah.
be put in that role of that language of first responders or the front line of student
Yeah.
mental health. It's particularly true for women. It's particularly true for people of color.
Mhm.
It's this invisible work that, going back to what you're saying about the publications, yeah, you're a great teacher, but the publications, until our overall academic reward structure recognizes what the value is of engaging with students in these very deep and long-term and labor-intensive ways, none of that will change. So this bifurcation of the rock star publisher who sends their TA into the classroom,
Yeah.
and then the person who spends almost all of their time engaging with students who doesn't get the publication work done that they need, and so does not have that tenured line. That bifurcation is actually even worse.
Yeah.
And we haven't solved for that. It's really interesting, Dave. Like, we can identify, like, there's no one that I know in academia who doesn't understand that mismatch between the
Yeah.
reward structure and what we're being asked to do. Not one person. Um, and there's a lot of hand wringing about it at the academy. Like, why isn't our research relevant? How can we engage with students in teaching and learning? But there's no will to change that. And so I just wait and do what I want to do. I feel very fortunate. I feel very fortunate that I get to write what I want to write and teach how I want to teach. But it's a unicorn position.
Yeah,
And,
it is. And
increasingly,
frankly,
it's going away.
the newbies, as we used to think of them, coming into teaching, great sacrifice to earn in the appropriate doctorate and all of that, and baskets of debt and everything else. And then they arrive and they're assistant professors. And then all of this other happens. They really don't have a chance to get their feet planted before all of this happened. And then along came the lockdown and trying to shift, forming relationships with people on a Zoom screen. And we're pretty good at it, Kathy, but I couldn't do it for very long. I know that would suck the juice out of me. So when I did get to Jacksonville this year, and I was happy to get down there, I looked around and yay, there's a lot of new faces at that meeting, and a lot of people who don't look like me, which is even happier. But boo, that, well, no matter how the sessions went, including the ones that I had with the fellows where we talked about the past, the present, and the future, we didn't get many people coming to that session. We had Bradford, the founder of the society, on screen. We had, Joan Gallows there, who received her lifetime recognition, the Bradford Award, all of that. And what kind of saddened me a bit was there were three other sessions, and hey, maybe I'll go to the one on AI, and I was there convening a session on human intelligence. That's what we can impact. We can't make people get better IQs, but we can certainly help them, as you said a moment ago, develop the learning skills, the self-developing learning skills, to bring that creativity to bear when a basically ritualized piece of software can no longer reach. We can reach past that with our creativity, our imaginations, with our tremendously complex brains. And yet, I think everyone on our screen and in that room that day was ready to say basically the same thing, that we've got to learn by our wits, and our wits are at issue. So wait a minute, let me get the soapbox off my shoes. uh, so yeah, it's bittersweet.
It is. And as a fellow, I get where you're at, totally. And I think I would say two things to that, Dave. I would say the first thing is that, you've talked about it at the beginning. I think our salad days of that foundation, the, the time, it sounds ridiculous to say it as a professor, but the time to actually think about things. How do I think about this? That seems to be increasingly a luxury, even among those who are in tenure track jobs.
Yeah.
When when I do outreach work, what is clear to me is that students aren't getting the kind of mentoring we got, meaning sort of the operational stuff. Let me give you an example. I worked with a lovely group of our newer MOBTS members. Uh, they are young, and some of them are pre-tenure, some of them are not on tenure line. And they are delightful young people. And we published a paper maybe last year in Management Teaching Review about leveraging the experience you're talking about. So leveraging vicarious learning, leveraging crowdsourcing. So that younger people, newer people, less experienced people, don't have to reinvent any wheels. You know, we have this
Yes.
vast store of experience and information. And we've been running a session at the MOBTS for many years, connecting people at various career stages to talk about, you know, what do you know how to do? What mistakes have you made?
Yeah.
And how can you help me not make that same mistake? So we published that paper. And what was striking to me about that process was the operational aspects of publication. How do you write a cover letter? How do you respond to reviews? How do you disagree with an editor and still get your paper published? How do you maintain sort of ideological ownership over your work while you're responding to reviews? Those are the things newer folks don't know. They don't know how to do that.
No.
And so I was a co-author and a coach all at the same time, and I had not anticipated that. And these are very bright people. They're very accomplished young people. They're lovely, but they just don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think they're not getting that kind of boots on the ground mentoring that we need to be giving them. And the second piece is that I think among the fellows and among the people in the society that have been there for a long time, we forget. Well, I'll speak for myself. I forget what I didn't know about engaged learning, experiential learning, course design. I co-authored a book with my long-term collaborator, Charles Fornachari, and another colleague, Nancy Nemi. It came out in 2022, and it's about course design and assessment in engaged learning. And I am astonished this is like all in our head, right? Like it was all in my brain, all in our heads. We put it out on paper and now it's a book. But I'm amazed at what people didn't know about the essentials of building a whole course around what we do at the MOBTS, which is engagement.
Yeah, experience. Yeah.
Relational learning.
Yeah.
And so what that taught me was that we have to stop taking for granted that everyone knows what we know. And we have to stop taking for granted that this type of information is being systematically offered to newer folks. And we need to do, I think, a better job of that, building that foundation. Like they're not getting it in their doctoral program.
No, and surprisingly, they're not.
Right? They're not. Their mentors may be caught up in the publication race themselves.
Yes.
And so it falls on societies and older, more experienced folks like us.
Yeah.
We have to pull back and meet our newer colleagues where they are and help them with that type of foundation building because they are not getting it. They're not getting it anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to take on that mantle, or else it's going to be lost. And so I think it needs to be more immediate. I think what we're offering as more experienced people has to be more immediate. Like what can we help them do more effectively next semester
Yeah.
versus thinking about, I mean, it's very operational, and that's a little sad, but it's very operational. It's very practical. What do they need to know how to do?
Yeah.
And so that's changed the way I engage with newer people in the field.
Oh, I think you definitely, your instincts are correct. Uh, when Peter Vale start, gave his talk on video at the University of New Mexico conference, he talked about the three things that are going to capture his energies for that foreseeable future. And the main thing he said is practice. And everything we wrote in the book on practice as a way of being, focused on the first conjecture that Peter wrote, which is practice is behavior.
It is.
Practice is doing. Until you're doing and discovering and revising and doing over and over again because you're committed to becoming even excellent at something, it's just words. It's lovely. It's something to listen to, but the doing is the key. It's behavior. And so what he was advocating for throughout the rest of that writing, and I'm continuing, is if you train, if you teach, back to your training days, first and foremost, find out what the people you're helping to learn know, if they and how they know it, and how it might relate to what you want to bring them into the awareness. If you skip that step, or if you do it in a routine way, you're not making the connection, that relational connection. Now, I had a lifetime of benefit from that few courses and the doctoral mentoring that Peter gave me in the 60s when I was raw and thought I knew everything. He gently showed me over my time with him that I didn't know shit. But he said, you're going to learn it because I see a learner in you. And so, yeah, we had that. And you had someone, we've lived under wings. And what I'm summarizing here, Kathy, is maybe speaking to our colleagues in the society, is those of us who have wings, and let's offer the space to bring people under, and then basically saying, now, I'm not going to teach you how to make a quilt. I'm going to teach you how to sew. And where the material is, you have to imagine the quilt. But let's start with, the very simple basics of doing the teaching. And someone might say, oh, that's too technical. No. If the students know that you understand what you're doing and you understand what a syllabus is and all the rest, they have, I think, a collective sigh of relief, because they've had these temporary people who are thrown into the course at the last minute who haven't even had a chance to revise a syllabus. And so when you come in and you say, now, this is how it's laid out, there's a semester, here are the modules, we will tweak them, and we will actually, in some cases, replace them. But basically, we have a design, right, Kathy? And you've written copiously about that. The students go, "Whew, wow!"
I think they do. I think that's a great insight. Helping them have confidence that within the infrastructure they can be creative, but there is a structure.
Oh yes,
And
yes,
I think that's helpful for them. There's also some of the other aspects of it, like you can build the infrastructure, certainly. I think one of the most powerful messages for relational learning is vulnerability.
yeah,
And, our semester just started. I'm teaching a course on interpersonal conflict management. And the idea that they're going to get up in front of their classmates, and it's all experiential, role play based, case based, those kinds of things, analytic, in terms of behavior, like you were talking about, and telling them, I learned something new every single time I teach this course. You all come up with very creative solutions. They come in with their own conflict scenarios, sort of the things that are meaningful for them. Like my roommate has their significant other other over all the time and it bugs the crap out of me, what do I do with that? And so,
Real,
we may think,
real.
well, come on. But that's where they are. That's what they're struggling with. And that's what they need help with. And so modeling vulnerability, like, I don't know all the answers. I'll
Yeah.
come in and say, wow, I just did something that was completely ineffective. Let me tell you about it.
Can you imagine the
Can we talk
relief
about
on
that?
the part of the high tension
I can see it.
way
Yeah.
that kids are
Yeah.
coming to school now? They're just wound up as tight as as tight as a tick, as we'd say up in Maine. And to
They
be able
are.
to say, oh, you know what? My professor said, she messed up on something, and
I
I'm feeling a little
completely
bit better
screwed that
about
up.
that. But that kind of
Yeah.
gaining of trust and helping build a climate of trust within the circles of the teams and the classes is what we proud of as organization behavior teachers. And now, as I have had conversations with a number of people out in what we call the real world in their roles in various corporations and other places, it's the same thing. They want to learn, they want to grow, they have to trust the people in their circles, and there's a lot of skill to that. And yet, as you've very well said and published, there's a skill to it. That means skill means you do it, and then you get some coaching and learning, and you do it again, and you do it again, and pretty soon you get that breakthrough feeling that, oh, now I know how to negotiate conflict. Now I know how to get that person out of my dorm room and have the person not try to hit me with something. So, yeah, the doing is a big deal,
It is a
including
big
the
deal.
doing of teaching.
Well, and I think too, and I've written about this, that I think we are very committed. I think we have great intentions as engaged and experiential educators. And I think sometimes our own positive experience leads to a lack of empathy or humility, which I think is also ironic. In the 20 years or so that I was an editor of JME and doing all of that outreach work, I was alarmed sometimes about the lack of discussion about what could possibly go wrong.
Yeah.
And so Sarah Wright, who's at Canterbury, and Jeannie Foray, who was at Western New England, and I wrote a series of 3 papers about what do we need to be thinking about as experiential educators from the ethics of teaching in this method. It's not always awesome. And students can have, we ask them to immerse themselves
Yeah.
emotionally in their own
Open
learning.
themselves up. Yeah.
And that means things can go bad.
Yeah.
And how prepared are we to help them manage that experience?
Yeah.
We're talking about the skill set and being alert to students who are not having a great experience.
Yeah.
And I think there are certainly safeguards that we need to create when we're asking students to be that vulnerable for their own learning. Like, it can be transformational, as you well know, as an experiential educator.
Mm-hmm.
And we're committed to this because we want the learning outcome. And I think we've been very cavalier about the potential risks to students and how we should manage. And this is not what, it's not the coddling. This is not what Jonathan Haidt is calling coddling. This is real emotional risk.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be better when we're asking students to learn how to do something differently, something holistic about their behavior and their practice as future leaders. I think we need to be better about managing that experience or helping
Yeah.
them manage that experience.
Yeah.
And so those are those are things, and this, Dave, you don't just happen upon those. Those are years of practice, years of feedback, years
Yeah.
of your own vulnerability, and years of people. You've been under other people's wings, as
Yeah.
you've been talking about, and that losing that connection, that sort of iterative learning how to do this well, that's what I worry about most with
Yeah.
the next generation, next couple generations. How do we help them gain the confidence that they need? And it's real confidence through trial and error, and how do we help them gain expertise at this type of practice? Because students are coming in with more, we talked about this a little bit, more, it's been hard for them. They're
Very.
coming in needier in terms of mental health, confidence. I know that you have seen the research on the negative mental health implications, close parenting, helicopter parenting. They need a lot of support.
Yeah.
And we need to get better at that. And again, it's societies like ours that are going to be the ones taking that on.
I think
And
so.
Yeah, I think we need to try to institutionalize that. The society and the board, you and I have both been on that board for many years, is full of volunteers.
Yeah.
And they are so well-meaning. We have the Doctoral Institute, we have the Early Education Institute. These are things that happen once a year.
Yeah, I was going to say it's such a modest contribution to a growingly sort of an angry problem in the sense. It's like it started out as a little thing, but now at least you and I, Kathy, and a bunch of other very nice people who are fellows and who are currently involved in leadership in that society and in the publication side of it. I have to say, as we round this out, I love belonging to people like you and them. If I got all the choices in the world, which I do, with whom I want to be identified, that's my proudest. Those are the people about whom I care the most in regard to, if there's anything that I can still do, I will do it. If someone called me right now in tears and said, "Hey, Dave, blah, blah, blah," I would give them an hour. I give them a day. Because I understand what the teaching role, the practice of teaching is requiring of our fellow human beings. And in classrooms in K-12, in classrooms in colleges and universities, in training centers, it's truly a vague future with people who I think who keenly want to succeed in it. So thank you. Kathy Lund Dean, this has been fantastic.
It's a delight. It's so nice to see. We were talking a little bit before that in our belonging, you can talk with people from many years ago, and it's just, and I think that's a real good belonging.
It really is. And as living as I now into my 80s with a lot of people I knew who are no longer with us. Literally no longer with us. I value it even more. So thank you for your example and your efforts and your colleagueship in this conversation.
It's been a delight. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for listening to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. If you'd like to hear more, go to Podomatic, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube. And please consider purchasing our book on practice as a way of being at mylibrary.world. It's a digital book with lots of features that you do not see in a conventional book. So once again, thank you, and I look forward to you listening again. Oh, and one more thing. Please